Welcome to the Industrialization and Localization Expert channel. I'm your host, Mangole Lope, and today we are joined by our special guest. She is a subject matter in localization, and she is also the founder and managing director of Olitshi Consulting, Technical Consulting, which offers services in innovation, standardization, and localization. Her name is Gcabashe, and I would like to welcome her to our IVE platform. Welcome to you, Ms. Gcabashe.
Thank you very much, and also to all the listeners. I'm happy to be here during this time.
So tell me, the space that you are in, what inspired you to found this exciting technical consulting company?
So, as you know, Wako, I was at the SABS for the past 9 years in various roles. And one of the things that became quite obvious is that we would get inquiries from manufacturers, from people wanting to start their own businesses, and usually they would come at a point where they are carrying their product that they want to maybe commercialize, but they've never looked at whether there are standards or not. And over, you would find that there's such a huge demand for knowledge, for information, and also technical support, really, to be able to set up, your own business. And people would come and ask about certification, about the testing of their products. And yet that's such a, in the value chain and in the life cycle of running your own business, there's a lot of technical work which we tend to overlook, which the more established industries know about. And so you find that these SMMEs or new founders are always on the back foot because there isn't sufficient technical support which has a product or a service which is repeatable, traceable, all of those things that are required in a structured commercial environment. And when I looked around and even talking to your funders, your DFIs, your IDCs, your CEDAs, it became clear that there's a gap in the support that we've put together in the country, in that you can get funding, but the funding is really about working capital, because that then assumes that you've already got a fully functioning production line or service delivery system. And yet there's nothing that supports you to get to the point where you have what they would call a bankable business, where you can actually now bring in investors. It's few and far between. And what it does is that it then kind of keeps you in a survivalist business and not one which is scalable, because you lack that technical foundation, which is so critical, irrespective of what product or service you are having. That was on the one hand. And then we were doing work with localization, local content verification, and you found that the way everybody approaches this issue of localization is almost as if it's seen as a burden, a regulatory burden, because when government talks about it, they talk about reporting. If we build our own technical industries which supply into these big build programs, the country will be in a phenomenally different place. And that's, for me, what was the inspiration behind setting up Olitshi.
Okay, perfect. And that's what we want the viewers of IVE to also have a better understanding about the industry. Now, you mentioned the various gaps within institutions that are supposed to be key drivers. For example, the South African Bureau of Standards in terms of local content verification and monitoring. So during your tenure there, did this institution have full capacity to be able to do the monitoring that is required, as well as to be able to do the upfront planning with the implementers to ensure that whenever they are going to do the monitoring, already there's that flow between the implementing agencies as well as the verification agencies?
So I think I need to clarify. So SABS was only appointed to conduct the verification. So that would mean that post and in the case of the triple PFA, it would be after the awarding of the tender that SABS would have to go in and conduct the verification based on the self-declaration. So the way local content verification declarations work is that the entities do a self-declaration at the time of tendering, and then that would be verified once the winning bidder was announced. So what you're highlighting with even the issues of capacity is that there were no capacity issues on conducting the verification on the SABS side. But what there is that the coordination of the whole cycle, which starts at the point of planning the procurement, with the procurement going out to tender and with the awarding, in my view, still needed a lot of streamlining. Secondly, what the other issue became that it was only, I think, last year that the Auditor General increased its own monitoring, because they would monitor, because they would assess the tenders and then issue findings against the state-owned agencies and province and departments for them not following the rules which require that local designated products, you must make sure that you account for the local content in the issuing of the tender. So we were not part of that chain. That would have the Auditor General involved. And it's now you are seeing a lot more findings being raised against departments for not specifying local content, especially in a product that is already designated as local. So what you find is that, and it's a lot of the issues, right, in government, is that you have various role players, and then if there's not proper coordination between them, is that then the implementation will hit a few barriers as you go along. But I think it's also important to highlight that training of procurers and procurement and supply chain managers is so critical, because what we were finding is that actually people didn't know how to spec for local content in their tenders. So some may argue that that was deliberate or not, but I think it's one of the important areas that there needs to be a lot more training at the officials level, at the people who actually write those documents, to make sure that we close the gap and you remove any information asymmetries. Because these are moving targets, right? Because you could wake up tomorrow, there's a new product that's been added to the list of designated products. And if we don't use technology, for instance, to be able to make sure that all of us are always updated on what has been designated, what must government procure locally, and then have the filtering down, which is this gap I spoke about where Olitshi comes in, is that for as long as the policymakers can designate, if this is not filtering down into industry so that the SMMEs start aligning themselves with the fact that the rules say that 100% of furniture, school furniture, must be locally produced. But I'm sure not many people know that, so that we also start making sure that we ask the right questions, because we are the ones who then get to start driving the implementers, because you've got the policymakers, you've got the implementers, and then you've got the private sector who must deliver on this, all in this loop. And I don't think we're having enough of these kinds of conversations where there's alignment about what is expected of each one of us, and how do we make sure that the benefits of localization filter into the South African economy.
Okay, thank you about those insights. What is intriguing about what you just said is the element of training towards the procurement practitioners so that they can be able to comply. But now the question is, it goes back to the question that I asked. Does SABS have capacity to conduct the training? Or is it training that is supposed to reside with the DTI or another institution? Or are SOCs or implementing organizations supposed to do their own internal trainings? Or are there service providers out there who are independent, who are supposed to do training? So who, in your own view, with your experience, is supposed to do the training to the procuring agencies?
So currently, that training resides with the DTI. But what the SABS had started doing is started also, as we are engaging with various procuring entities, supporting in the providing of those trainings and making sure that people understand. But here's an opportunity, right, for the private sector, for someone who's an entrepreneurial, because this is not secret knowledge, this is publicly available information which needs to be properly packaged and then the training rolled out. It's not sufficient. Can't do a once-off training. It's got to be all the time, which then makes sure that people are able to always, when new people come into procurement, this should be a standing item there. If we really say that we are connecting all of the dots in the chain, which allow us to be effective in how we roll out localization. So it's not, the capacity may be there, but it's not sufficient.
Yeah.
And so there's an opportunity, like I say, is that for me, I see this is where private sector comes in, right? In that you close these gaps that you see that are there, is that really there's an opportunity for someone to establish a very direct training institute which looks at how do you make sure that procuring entities are always up to speed. What is going to be helpful to drive the push as well is that the more the monitoring is happening and the reporting is happening on the side of the Auditor General, it means that the stick is there, which is going to drive the compliance on the side of those that need to comply. But we shouldn't only look at it as a compliance exercise, because it's critical. This is an opportunity for us to bring back manufacturing into South Africa. Transformer that needs to be made in South Africa is made in South Africa, and we stop, put pressure as well as the consumers to make sure that these technical items actually are made locally and support manufacturers.
The last
Yes.
decade, if we just to reflect on the last decade, in terms of infrastructure development projects that South Africa has undertaken, would you say that we have done justice, make sure that we achieve our localization imperative in the country? I mean, this can range from all the projects from power, IPPs in the energy space, road infrastructure, and everything else where we involve foreign technology partners.
And the answer is a clear no. And if we don't change our behavior and do something different in the next phase of these, of the huge build programs, we're probably going to find ourselves in the same situation again. And I think it's easy enough to say to someone in a policy that this is what you must do. The big question is, what have we done to enable the transformation, to enable the training? So one of the things that I've been talking about, and I'm hoping that it's a project that gets off the ground, is, for instance, if I wanted to buy elastic bands and I went onto the Chinese Alibaba site, they will give me all of their manufacturers. We don't have a portal which tells us what actually is made in South Africa. I mean, if you wanted to even start, I see that pretty bicycle on your cushion there. You want to make bicycles. You don't even know who or what of component there is made here. You have to call a friend or call a network, and we are also not in order to be able to start linking the networks to create a product, to make something. It's at the design phase where you influence where the components come from. So even if our designs are all coming from overseas, they will spec bearings from the people they know and not us. And yet we've got all of this capability. So we need to start from the basic is, what do we make? Where can anyone find out what we make in South Africa?
Absolutely. I like the portal example that you give it, because it should be something that can be easily you know, found in there.
Exactly. That's why even within the country, if somebody wants to make something, it's easier for them to go and find a manufacturer in China or India because from their homes, than it is to find somebody locally. And we've got technical skills, and it's something that really needs to be highlighted and pushed as a matter of urgency. Is that if we don't start pulling together our own networks and finding what can we make, we'll always be left behind, because it'll be easy to find, because everybody then is in a rush with the procurement. So you're not going to spend time going to drive around when you can easily go Google, find, there it is, and that's who you send your RFQ to, or the tender, whatever the case may be.
There is an institution called Technology Localization Implementation Unit, housed at the CSIR, merged with the former UNIDO localization unit at the DTI. Have you by any chance worked with them in the past?
So we've worked with the TLIU quite closely, because this idea of the portal is important and they have information. But one of the really I'm gonna keep on harping on is that when different mandates almost collide, and there isn't a view which says what is the country's view, so that we then are able to see where everybody works. You find that government works in very different directions, and we don't talk to each other as much as we should, even as we are implementing. So yes, we've dealt with them, and they actually have got some of the stuff that I'm talking about, and it's about how do we then make things visible, so that everybody is able to see that this is what we have in the country, and this is where we can start our first point of contact, rather than getting lost, and getting swamped by the more organized international companies, because they know how to play the game.
Perfect. Now, we are going into the last phase of the National Development Program, which is NDP 2030. We have 10 years, which we reflected on the past 10. If you were to paint a picture to a foreign investor or potential investor, like we've had, I think a few weeks ago, where the infrastructure department led by Dr. Rabu Kupa was having a launch of the infrastructure program that is coming. So the question is, how do we best give confidence to foreign investors who still want to come to South Africa and implement some of the projects, and also things that will enable us to be able, from the lessons learned, to be able to, make sure that we maximize our localization aspirations.
So firstly, I think it's important to note that South Africans are very skilled, highly skilled, and also are capable. We've got the capabilities in the country. And like any other country, development for us is quite important. I mean, we've got a youth dividend, we've got high unemployment, and whatever opportunities there are to start finding ways to increasing the skills levels of our people, and with the support of all of the international companies, I think that is something that we can't lose sight of, is that it doesn't help us in the long run to not have sustainability built into all of the projects that come on board. Is that how are we preparing the country so that when we hand it over to the next generation, they gain a fully functioning economy and a fully functioning country, but also importantly, a country where their skills can be used. It's one of those ironies that you find that we do train, and then people find that they can make use of their skills internationally, and those are the very same skills that we need in the country. And localization is not anti investment from outside, but it's about how do you build sustainability in the country where you are also deploying your technologies. Because if you are able to take your technologies, deploy it in South Africa, and know that that even in the servicing, in the maintenance, South Africa can then become a base for being able to expand the service even throughout the continent and back globally again. Those are the opportunities that we sit with, because we do have the skills. But no country can afford not to be growing its industrial base, not to be creating opportunities for employment for its people. And that is something that we've all got to realize, is that stability globally requires on local stability. And local stability does come from proper economic activity. And there's no way, you're not going to hide yourself in a bubble somewhere and ignore unrest or any of the social impacts of there not being sufficient employment in the country.
Okay, perfect. Now tell us, how is Olitshi Innovation Progress, your technical consultancy, contribution towards achievement of this localization imperative?
So one of the things that we are driving quite strongly is this technical trade portal. And I'm not going to reveal, but we're in the process of finalizing something with one of the state companies about how do we take that forward. I'm such an advocate of it because I know how easy it can be or how difficult it can be to procure a technical item from South Africa. And yet we've got the resources, we've got the skills. And that's the only way that we start also identifying exactly where our gaps are. And so that is what we are driving. But we're also pulling in different partners, because one of the things is that, as I keep calling us the emerging private sector, it's to get the funders, the DFIs, to understand that there's a level of support that as a emerging manufacturer, first generation manufacturer, that you need, which is not even about, it's not about money, but it's about just being the technical capabilities and also knowledge sharing that we don't have. And it's also about how do you bring all of these experienced manufacturers together in a program which says, and it's not your usual mentoring, because we always just talk about mentoring, but it's how do you allow the networking between someone who's just started a new cosmetics company, manufacturing cosmetics, with the L'Oreal as an example, where its practical exposure is so critical to be able to support you as you move and you build your business beyond a startup phase into a phase where it can grow and is scalable. So those are the two main areas that I'm driving. I'm also quite passionate about African traditional medicine and development. And I was fortunate in that I've traveled quite extensively in the East and seen how developed their traditional medicines are, to the point that they exported to all of us. And yet it's the same, it's exactly the same base and same structurally. And so for me, it's been a bit of a study and a lesson in what do they have that we don't have, which has allowed them to export their traditional medicine. You can go to an Ayurvedic doctor anywhere in the world. You can go to a Chinese doctor anywhere in the world. And yet African doctors are stuck in this realm, and it's as if we are happy for that to happen. And yet we want to know which plants they use, but we are not interested in anything else, you know? And so even this whole thing in COVID has actually been, for me, quite interesting, because it shows you that we ignore our own heritage at our own peril, you know? And yet there are things that could be done which improve the experience of the user, improve the practice, and at the same time create economic benefits throughout the country. And so it's finding those niche areas which have the ability to really improve and move our people up from where they are and create entrepreneurs in that space. I mean, cannabis is the new big thing, cannabis oil. And yet you're going to find that the beneficiaries of that industry that's rising, they call it a sunrise industry, is actually not going to be the people who've been cultivating all the time, because we just kind of ignore and we build a new industry and we forget about the old. And so it's challenging that, is that how can you start formalizing what was previously informal, but is at scale, which is much more difficult. It's exactly like renovating the house. It's easier to build a house from scratch than to renovate, but we can't keep throwing away what we have already.
Okay, those are very excellent insights, and I believe our viewers of I will find a lot of wisdom in what you share and be able to build. But what I've also noticed from you, you are very passionate. Your entrepreneurial skills. What kind of advice can you give to aspiring entrepreneurs and other young people out there who can be able to be economically active through establishment of startups or any other business idea that they have?
So the first thing that I'm going to start by saying is, as you are thinking about what you want to do, find out if there's a standard for it. Why that's important is that we start things and we make our lives so difficult as if we are the only people who've ever thought of anything. There is nothing that you want to do that someone has not thought about, and in some place or the other has not started doing something about. So give yourself an advantage, and that's an advantage. Find out if there's a standard for it, and then you use that standard on which you start building and even retrofitting, because if there's a standard, it means that technical people have put their technical knowledge and know-how there available for you to use. And that's a massive, massive advantage that you can start with as you go about. But secondly, ask, speak to people, speak to even those that you think of as your competitors, because in collaboration, in talking, in networking, that is how a business is built. It's networks. Whether you think of yourself as an introvert or an extrovert actually doesn't matter. Learning to ask, learning to put yourself out there, learning to be vulnerable, because to express your idea means that you are revealing, something that you also may or may not be sure about. And the more you interrogate it, the more you talk about it, and the more you start doing and start looking around at who's doing similar things, that is what gives you the impetus. It's a difficult road. And I think for me, I want us to start getting it in our heads that we are the new private sector, because when you say this entrepreneur word, it can get lost. When you tell yourself, I am, when they talk private sector, they are talking about me. It makes your responsibilities so much more. When they talk about we need to be creating jobs and employment, that's me. I sit here and I must be thinking that what I'm doing must be bigger than just about providing for me and my family. It must be about how can I contribute to creating employment in the country. The two people, if each of us, if we had 1 million and we each employing 2, 3, 4 people, providing the freelancers with work, that is what is so important. You must have the big vision. Really, you must. And it's not about being, I know sometimes people say, you're thinking too big. You must think big. You have to think big. Yeah. From the get-go. You don't start thinking big later on. And then get practical in your thinking big by starting to put together the building blocks and doing the work. Every day you do the work. Every day you do the work. And that for me is the advice. It's hard. It is hard, but it's so fulfilling. I'm sorry I may be taking a little bit of time, but one of the difficulties, somebody said the most addictive thing in the world is heroin and a monthly salary. So you can imagine how scary it is to have to leave the comfort of the 25th and SMS is coming in, whether you've been productive or not, to where you have to face yourself now. And it is hard, but I must tell you that I sleep so well. I have peace. I'm happy. I feel like I've got a cause, but it's not that it's easy. No, it's not easy. Really, it's not.
No, absolutely. I love the passion in you. And the other element that you mentioned, which I just want also to expand, is the platforms that you said as business, private sector, entrepreneurs. We need to have them. The networking, the collaboration. And that's where the mouthpiece becomes solid. That's where we're able to have a representation in decision making.
Okay.
For example, now we don't know who sat in the room while creating an SMME relief fund for COVID-19, and other decisions. Then you can see a lot of other sectors grouping themselves and trying to negotiate for their interests. So what can you say in terms of SMME development, having the kind of robust platform that can engage at various stakeholder levels to make sure that there is that unity and growth?
I think what people need to remember is that government is lobbied. And government is not lobbied by an individual, it is lobbied by collective. So we really need to start putting together these collaboration platforms as industries and stop viewing each other as competitors only. In competing, there are areas where we need collaboration because you need the enabling environment for your industry to be working. So it is so critical that as SMEs, we have a voice. There is a voice which starts talking about the realities of what kind of support you require. Because if you are not in the rooms where that's decided, somebody else is. And it's not about saying that it then becomes a volumes game. No, we must be strategic about this. Is that how do you come together as various SMEs in different industries and then start looking at what are the enabling levers that you need as that industry, not as an individual, but as an industry. Because when you grow and support an industry, the individual enterprises also grow and benefit. It's not a zero-sum game, which is that if I benefit, then it means that you are going down. No, the way we will grow and the way we will thrive is about using the tools that help us grow the pie rather than wanting to cut up a small and shrinking pie. And that requires strategy and organization, not in opposition to anyone, but as a way of being able to give guidance to policymakers and be able to say, this is what we need and this is what will help us thrive. Remember, people writing those policies, a lot of them, and it's not with no disrespect, are exactly that. They are policymakers. They don't necessarily have their feet in the trenches, but they are there to support that which is in the trenches. But you can't sit back and think somebody else is going to do it for you. It's important that we start finding the areas of commonality and starting to then really be clear about the support that is required. And the more coherent and cohesive the voice is, it's easy for government to deal with. Government cannot deal with 56 million people individually. However, if you start chunking the requirements, that's when you get proper support.
Sis Amanda, you gave us a mouthful. All the insight. I believe our viewers, followers, and subscribers will find value in this that you just shared with us. The last question I have for you before we wrap up is, who inspires you to have the drive on a daily basis?
It's the people around me, and when you've seen the power of information, it's that for me, that's all I'm about really, is about breaking down information asymmetries. If we all had all of the information and the knowledge we needed, we actually would be much further. And when you talking to people, I love experiences, I love research. That is the thing for me, that and the experience I've had where I've met people who have brilliant ideas, and yet just a small detail ends up derailing it, or just a small piece of information actually then makes you see someone just fly. Love to see success. South Africa is a land of opportunities, and I look at it that way, and I think that we have an opportunity to also inspire the continent.
You've heard what the subject matter experts are saying. We hope and believe that you have all your answers that came through this particular engagement. It was a very insightful discussion that we had. And I would like to thank Sis Amanda for availing herself, sharing all the insights with regard to localization and all the elements, and key to that, standardization. And we will be engaging further. We invite you, because this is an open platform, to give reviews, comments, and engage us on all our various platforms as we continue to share with you these exciting stories. And Sis Amanda, thank you very much, and till we meet again, thank you.